So the first question I was going to ask was just how you got into the folk punk scene. What sort of attracted you to it?
The short answer to that is when I was 13, really when I was 12, my brother was already playing in bands. He was probably 14. Yeah, I think I was 12. He was 14. And he was playing in bands, and I played drums in one of his bands, early bands. They were called, what was it called? Pyrotechnic Conspiracy. And that was, I don't think any of that got recorded. But yeah, so when I was a kid, like just playing music with my brother is really how I kind of got into the folk. And I guess the thing is also, I guess that was folk punk. It was just a bunch of weird kids in my town, the town where I grew up, Brattleboro, Vermont. And it wasn't a very cohesive type of like folk punk thing. It was just kids who like did drugs and liked music. And I don't know, it was kind of weird and bizarre. And there were good parts and bad parts, but looking back, I'm not even certain it was folk punk. It was just, young people playing music.
What would you say the difference is between punk rock compared to folk punk?
I don't know exactly. Let's see. This is going to be apparent pretty quickly in this interview, which is that I'm not very punk. I really like, I don't know the history of punk music. I didn't grow up like listening to punk. My brother liked listening to punk a lot when we were kids, and I kind of liked some of it. I really liked Against Me. That was kind of the punk band that I really liked a lot, and I still like listening to them sometimes. But so I don't know the answer to the question, the difference between folk punk and punk rock. I think probably my guess is that it's somewhat it is about like instrumentation or something, like banjos, washboards, acoustic guitars, violins, that type of thing is what I think of when I think of folk punk, proper folk punk. But then there's stuff like, I don't know, I guess Ramshackle Glory, would be folk punk, right? Because it seems like it fits in that genre, but it's got, electric guitars but then it still does have the banjos, and it has the accordion, and it had that kind of strumming pattern of like kind of the folk punk strumming pattern. So,
and do you reckon there's a difference in the ideologies a bit between folk punk compared to punk rock?
Yeah, that could be. I don't really know enough again about like the basics of the different genres of punk. I do know that there's been political activist punk rock for a long time, but then there's also been just kind of like getting drunk, smashing shit punk rock for a long time. I think folk punk, from what I can tell ideologically, is more aligned with the activist like stream of punk rock music. But then there's like I'm not well read in this, but I feel like there's also the just get drunk party type of folk punk music too, which might not have really anything to do with the activism or like political stances.
Yeah, right.
Even within something as specific as folk punk, there is like different kinds,
Definitely, I'd agree. And coming back to something that you probably know more about, talk me through your songwriting process.
I start with, I'm a very much like music first, lyric second kind of person. I always think of melodies and rhythms and like musical ideas. That feels more immediate to me, more natural. And then trying to fit in words usually comes second. So yeah, like the way I write these days, and it has changed a lot. Like I've been doing it for, I don't know, 15 years. So when I was younger, I think it was a little different for me, but still similar. I think come up with like play guitar, sing and think of a melody, and then try to find words that fit into that melody. In terms of like lyrics, how to write the lyrics, that part is whew. Sometimes I feel like I know how to do it, And other times I'm just like, I don't know what the heck to say. How do you write lyrics that don't suck? You know, it's a constant like uh rolling river, I guess, you know. Sometimes I feel like, okay, no, I know what I want to write about. Other times I'm like, wow, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just
Is there like a place or a specific thing you feel you pull your inspiration from when it comes to music?
yeah, I mean, for me, especially in the last 10 years, it comes from like the deeper part of my spiritual practice is really where I draw inspiration. Is like, I'm always trying to write music that isn't, or might write lyrics that isn't like overtly spiritual, because I find that to be very cheesy, kind of like, yes, you know, so-called spiritual music I often don't really like that much. But well, that's not even true. It just depends. There's a certain kind of spiritual music that I find to be a little bit corny or something. Um, and so I want to avoid cliches, and I kind of want to avoid talking directly about spirituality. That's totally what I'm trying to like put into poetry, is my experience of life and like the slightly deeper themes of my life that aren't just totally surface level, but like a little bit deeper.
Yeah, right. And how does the like audience respond to sort of your music, do you feel?
You know what I get most is that and this is what keeps me, you know, really kind of keeps me going with music, is I get messages from people that say, your music really helped me through a difficult period of my life. And usually the person can't exactly say what it was about my music, but like there's something in the content or in like the lyrics or in the feeling of my songs that seems to help people or find people who are in a difficult place, maybe a difficult state of mind or something. And it seems to help certain people. I don't know, find some sense of balance within it, or some sense of like a bigger perspective within the suffering that they're in. So I don't know. I take that as the highest compliment when I get that. So that seems to be what people end up taking from it. Other than that, no, that's usually when people bother to write me, that's usually what they say is, your music helped me in some way.
Yeah, awesome. And do you think that's sort of what the folk punk scene is about, like community and
Oh,
support?
yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. That seems to be it. That's right. That seems to be it.
Cool. And for a fun question, I wanted to ask a tour story if you have like a awesome, wacky time on
Oh
tour.
man. I'll tell one. It's not really a very good story, but I think it is. I'm going to tell it because I think it illustrates something about folk punk that I think is cool, which is when I think I was 18. I was in this band um, called Preschool. It was with just a couple of friends, and we decided we wanted to go on tour. So we tried to book a tour from Vermont to, I think, New Orleans and then back. And we did book a tour. I did it through, I think it was probably through Facebook, and you know, the folk punk network on the internet is like, it's established, you know, especially with social media. It's very possible to reach out to kind of folk punk people all over the place. And I got some shows lined up, and it was one of the first tours it was the first tour I ever booked. And I was 18, and the band I was playing in, no one had ever heard of. And we drove, you know, had all these long, long drives, and we would drive all day in this, in our car, and we would get to the show, and it would be like two people, you know, or one person. And this isn't that good a story. Like I'm saying, like, it's really not that good a story. It's almost a good story because there's no good part of the story. It was just me and my friends, you know, traveling, meeting people who were willing to go out of their way to set up a show that they knew wasn't going to probably be a big show at all, and wasn't going to make anybody money, including us, and it wasn't going to be really like an exciting thing, but people were willing to go out of their way to set it up and let us stay in their house just do it, for the love of, I guess, of community and of just knowing what it's like to want to be traveling and playing music, and knowing that there's a benefit in that, and people getting together and yeah, just being creative and sharing art. So that's my really not very exciting tour story of like probably the most underwhelming tour I've ever been on. That was a lot of work, not a lot of payoff, but in retrospect, kind of a beautiful example of folk punk, just like it is very accessible. Like if you have the type of, I shouldn't say it's totally accessible. You have to have a certain level of privilege to even consider like going on a trip and not making any money, so of course it's not really accessible across, socioeconomic, situations. But if you're like me, like a middle class kid who has the opportunity to do it, at that point, it is very accessible. You can, people will go out of their way to try to help you and give you an opportunity to be creative. So
cool. That sort of ties into my next question. Well, actually, I was going to ask, how do you feel DIY has sort of impacted your experience in the industry and how you like present yourself and behind the scenes and everything, just how DIY has sort of been present in your experience and journey of music?
Well, it's the only thing I know, it's the only thing that I've done much of, in terms of the bulk of the shows I've played have been totally DIY. And then I've played a few little ones that are more, professional. And there's just this thing, I think really the heart of like DIY, or like what I take from it, is a sense of like, not taking yourself too seriously, and B, like just connecting and being real, and I don't know, just being a down to earth person. And I think that feels like the only kind of real show or like industry that I would really want to be part of. Like I think the times where I've played a little more professional stuff, there's been an air of like, well, you've got to be kind of present yourself as like your brand image. Like you have to like have it together and have your act down and kind of face the world in this way that's really appealing, and, just go out there and crush it. And nothing against that. I mean, some people, that's what some people want to do, but I've always felt like if I can't be just honest, like, and more down to earth and more like scattered, or just, I don't know, a little less polished, then it kind of takes a lot of the joy out of it. So I do think that has definitely influenced my overall experience of playing live music. But I also, I'm also not like a big name touring act, so I think it happens to bands, that get into larger audiences at a certain point. You do kind of have, you have a kind of brand image, and you present it like that.
How big would you say the folk punk scene is in the US?
It seems big-ish because, like, at least on the eastern states, I've done quite a few tours where, yeah, like a lot of states have some type of DIY music scene. And again, I don't know technically the difference between just DIY music and folk punk and punk rock and, just pop music that's like not major label. Anyways, I do think there's a kind of DIY scene a lot of places. I think it's pretty big in the US. Yeah. So
if you wouldn't necessarily call yourself folk punk, how would you describe yourself and your music?
I would say probably that I'm folk punk in a certain sense of who's listening, who's listening to my songs. So like culturally, I do think I'm folk punk. That's my audience. That's the people who find my music. Um, Musically, I really don't think I am. I don't think anyone who's listened to my music would be like, yeah, that is folk punk. You know, it's just not. It's more like indie pop music. Um, I've started calling it Dharma pop because the Dharma is like the Buddhist Dharma. Like that, I'm a Buddhist, so the Buddhist path is a very significant part of my life. And so when I think about what is this music that I'm doing, it's like Dharma pop. It's like it's not like devotional Dharma music. It's pop, you know, it's definitely pop music, but it's coming from a place of like trying to reflect on, like I said before, some of the deeper themes of like life and suffering and dealing with suffering and how to, you know, be on a trajectory that is meaningful or at least like some sense of growing. So I call it Dharma pop, but I think a more easily accessible term for it would be just indie pop.
Cool. What advice would you give to yourself, like your younger self, do you reckon, in terms of the music industry and making your way through it?
I would tell my younger self, and actually this would just be myself from like the last 2 years, because when I was young, like in my early 20s, I don't think I needed to be told much. Like I was just kind of playing music and enjoying it, and that was it. But there was a certain point in my later 20s where I realized like, oh, I'm getting older. I've been doing music for a while. I want to take this more seriously and sort of take the next step in my music like career. And this is important because this is advice to my younger self, not necessarily someone listening's younger self, because someone listening's younger self might be in a very different place. But what I would tell my younger self is just totally relax. Like try not to think of music as a commodity. Try not to commodify your own creative process. And, you know, don't go down the YouTube rabbit hole of like how to market yourself as a, you know, don't even do that. You're just not going to be happy thinking about your creative expression in that way. And I would just tell my younger self, like, really try to find work that you find meaningful, that you love, and really try to do that. Try to find work that you feel is like helpful to somebody else as well. And let music be an ornament of your life, and let it be its full beauty without trying to commodify it, and without trying to package it, and without trying to figure out a marketing plan. And just drop it. I would have just told, just drop it. Don't drop music, but drop that tension of like trying to be somebody and trying to be established and be seen. Because for me, that wasn't working.
And what are your future plans with music and where you're headed next?
I feel like I've come to a place in my life. I feel very grateful because I feel that I've come sort of a full circle. Like when I started music, it was definitely a natural expression of my creative impulse and my creative life. And for much of my 20s, it remained that way. And then it kind of like went into this, I got into this headspace with it where it was like, oh, and now I'm going to also try to make a living with it and be more professional or something. And that kind of like crumbled, and it was sort of difficult because, you know, I felt like disoriented, like, wait, who am I? You know, am I a musician or not? And I don't know. It was a weird couple of years, but I feel grateful that I feel like I've come through that cycle, maybe completely at this point, where I'm back kind of where I was when I was young, where it's like, I'm really just playing music. Like I'm playing this. This is a creative thing. And so where I see it going is I have a feeling, I don't know. I have a feeling my music is about to get even better because I'm not so concerned with it. And I have a feeling that it's rather than me trying to like push my music in a way, I'm just going to let it take me places. And so it's not a good for a business plan, but it's good for like just experimenting with creativity. So that's kind of where I feel like it's going to go. And okay, so to answer it a little more directly, I think I'm going to be recording albums and probably making music that's pretty weird or kind of pushing a little bit the expectations that I have for myself and other people might have for me. And just really playing and sort of like experimenting.
Yeah, nice. Is there something you'd like your audience, or you hope your audience for, to take away from your music?
I think if I could have it be anything, I would just have it be, I would have the person who's listening to my music hear what they need to hear at that time. And that may be a little bit of a sort of like a cop-out answer, but I think it reflects the way that I try to write lyrics in particular. I would want them to take away some sense of a sense of humor, a little bit, like taking themselves or their situation a little less seriously, not like trivializing it, but some sense of like a little sense of humor with things. And I would also want them to take a sense of some type of inspiration, I guess, towards the possibility that actually they might not be like fucked up, inherently fucked up. Like the ways that we're fucked up, we all have different ways that, you know, we need some work, but that inherently, like deep down, actually, I would want them to have some sense of inspiration that there's something in them that's just not messed up. That's like just inherently just fine.